real intentions of the followers of Muhammad towards Europe and Christianity in current times. Will you explain?
Let me start with a resume of the background of this battle and then the details. The Battle of Tours, October 10, 732, is also known as the Battle of Poitiers. The battle was fought near the city of Tours in France, close to the border between the Frankish realm and independent Aquitaine. The battle pitted Frankish and Burgundian forces under Charles Pepin, later titled Martel, against an army of the Arabian Umayyad Caliphate led by Abdul Rahman al-Ghafiqi, Governor-General of Al-Andalus. In Arabic, it is immortalized as Ma'rakat Bilat al-Shuhada, meaning the Battle of the Court of Martyrs. I would like to point out to our listeners that even 1300 years ago, those Muhammadan Muslims who died slaughtering, raping, murdering and plundering the Christian Spaniards and Gauls were called martyrs, just as their current suicide bombers and other mass murderers of defenseless civilians are still called today. The Arabian Umayyad Caliphate at the time of the Battle of Tours was perhaps the world's foremost military power. Great expansion of the Caliphate occurred under the reign of the Umayyads. Muhammadan Muslim armies pushed across North Africa and Persia through the late 600s. Forces led by Tariq bin Ziyad crossed Gibraltar and established Muhammadan power in the Iberian Spanish Peninsula, which consequently and subsequently crossed into southern France with the intention of expanding as far into Europe as their victories permitted. Other armies of the conquering Arabian hordes established power as far away as Sindh in what is now the modern state of Pakistan. The Muhammadan Empire under the Umayyad Arabs was now a vast domain that ruled, colonized and subjugated a diverse array of tens of millions of peoples on 3 continents: Christians, Zoroastrians, Jews, Hindus and others. It had destroyed what were the 2 formerly super military powers, the Sassanid Persian Empire, which it absorbed completely, and the Byzantine Christian Empire, most of which it had absorbed, including Armenia, Syria, Judea, Palestina, Egypt, and North Africa. The Frankish realm under Charles Pepin was the foremost military power in Western Europe. It consisted of what is today most of France, most of Western Germany, and the Low Countries. The Frankish realm had begun to progress towards forming the first real imperial power in Western Europe since the fall of Rome. On his march through the southern districts of France, in the land of the Franks, Abdul Rahman utterly destroyed many towns and villages, killed and enslaved a great number of the people, and seized all the booty and property that he could carry off. He plundered the city of Bordeaux, and it is said that he obtained so many valuable things that every soldier was loaded with golden vases and cups and emeralds and other precious stones. Abdul Rahman trusted the tactical superiority of his cavalry and had them charge the Franks repeatedly. This time, the faith of the Umayyads had, in their cavalry, armed with their long lances and swords, which had brought them so many victories in previous battles, was not justified. In one of the rare instances where medieval infantry stood up against cavalry charges, the disciplined Frankish soldiers withstood the assault, though, according to some Arab sources, the Arab cavalry was able to break several times into the interior of the Frankish square. The Muhammadan horsemen dashed fearlessly and frequently against the battalions of the Franks, who resisted heroically, and many fell dead on both sides. Despite these determined assaults, the Frankish wall did not give in. It appears that the years of year-round training that Charles had instilled in his men paid off brilliantly. In fact, his hard-trained soldiery accomplished what was not thought possible at that time, that infantry could withstand the determined onslaught of cavalry. For the first time, this was exactly what happened as the Frankish infantry withstood the repeated assaults of the Umayyad heavy cavalry. Charles had created an army of professional infantrymen, which was both highly disciplined and well motivated, having campaigned with him all over Europe. They were buttressed by the levies that Charles basically used to raid and disrupt his enemy lines and gather food for his infantry. The Mozarabic Chronicle of 754 says, And in the shock of the battle, the men of the north seemed like a sea that cannot be moved. Firmly they stood, one close to another, forming as it were a bulwark of ice, and with great blows of their swords they hewed down the Arabs. Drawn up in a band around their chief, the people of the Franks carried all before them. Their tireless hands drove their swords down to the breast of the foe. Those Umayyad troops who had broken into the square had tried to kill Charles, but his bodyguards who surrounded him would not be broken. The battle was still in flux when Frankish histories claim that a rumor went through the Umayyad army that the Frankish scouts threatened the booty that the Mohammedans had plundered from Bordeaux. Some of the Umayyad horsemen, without permission from their officers, at once broke off the battle and returned to camp to secure their loot. According to Mohammedan accounts of the battle, in the midst of the fighting, scouts from the Franks sent by Charles began to raid the camp and supply train, including slaves and other plunder. Charles presumably had sent scouts to infiltrate and cause chaos in the Umayyad base camp and free as many of the slaves as possible, hoping to draw off part of his foe. This tactic succeeded way beyond his wildest expectations, as many of the Umayyad cavalry unilaterally broke ranks and returned to their camp. To the rest of the Mohammedan army, this appeared to be like a retreat, but soon it became an undisciplined rout. Both Western and Mohammedan records agree that while trying to stop the debacle, Abdul Rahman became surrounded and was cut down, and the Arabian troops then withdrew altogether to their camp. All the host fled before the enemy, candidly wrote one Arabic source, and many died in the flight. The Franks resumed their phalanx and rested in place throughout the night, believing the battle would resume at dawn the following morning. When the Arab forces did not renew the battle the next day, the Franks feared an ambush. Charles at first believed that the Mohammedan forces were trying to lure him down the hill and into the open. This tactic he knew he had to resist at all costs. He had, in fact, disciplined his troops for years that under no circumstances whatsoever would they break formation and come out in the open. Only after extensive reconnaissance of the Umayyad camp by Frankish soldiers was it discovered that the Mohammedans had escaped by stealth during the night. Both historical accounts assert that the Mohammedan Muslims had so hastily abandoned their camp that even the tents were abandoned as the Umayyad forces headed back to Iberia, Spain, with whatever loot remained that they could carry. The Franks was victorious. Abdul Rahman al-Ghafiqi was killed, and Charles subsequently extended his authority in the south. 9th century chroniclers, who interpreted the outcome of the battle as divine judgment in his favor, gave Charles the nickname Martellus, the hammer, recalling the title heaped upon Judas Maccabeus, the hammerer of the Jewish Maccabean revolt against the Seleucid Greek Empire. Exact details of the battle, including its exact location and the number of combatants, cannot be determined from the accounts that have survived. Only one thing remains certain: the Frankish troops won the battle without cavalry. History is peppered with singular battles, the outcome of which did actually change the course of human history, such as those of Marathon and Arbela. Without a shadow of a doubt, the battle that was won by Charles Martel at Tours was seminal, since it saved the whole of Christian Europe from becoming Islamized and thus actually preserving Christianity. Mohammedan Islam at this moment of history and in the foreseeable future is in the process of reconquering Christian Europe without war. They are slowly but most assuredly conquering her demographically from within, through immigration and a much higher birth rate.